The theme of today's meeting is Strategy of Russia's Development. Why do you think this theme is so relevant for today?
The statehood of Russia is in a paradoxical situation. In comparison with Japan, China, the countries of the Euro-American conglomerate, we have an incomparably richer natural resource potential: gas, timber, oil, gold, etc., the world's highest educational level of the population, powerful intellectual administrative potential, and the overwhelming majority of our people are dragging out a miserable existence. China has doubled its gross domestic product over the last 10 years, while Russia has reduced its by almost half. These paradoxes in all spheres of life of our society do not testify to individual particular mistakes, but to a system crisis, flaws in our worldview, and the absence of an understandable to the people strategy of development. This is exactly that case about which T.K. Chesterton spoke. It isn't that they can't see the solution, it's that they can't see the problem. Realizing this, the President of Russia, Vladimir Putin, posed the question of the need to revise the conception of national safety. For the first time in recent centuries, a situation has developed in Russia that does not impede the free development of any kind of socially useful initiatives, the active manifestation of which in the previous regimes was in principle excluded. The time that has elapsed since the launch of perestroika, for those who did not expect directives from high places, turned out to be quite enough to form a social initiative in order to formulate a strategy for the country's development. On its basis, the currently prevailing, vicious governorial algorithm should be replaced. The algorithm, we wanted the best, but it turned out as always. The time has come for its nationwide discussion.
We know how far from each other are the models of social development of different countries of the world, the strategy of their development, and what lies in the core of such striking differences.
Well-being of society, the movement towards ruin or prosperity, the long-term prospects of any country and even civilizations are in essence conditioned by the prevailing raviousness in a particular society and the corresponding to it worldview. One can perceive others as talking tools and consider any form of their exploitation and suppression to be the norm, up to total extermination, as was the case, for example, with the Native Americans during the formation of the United States. One can have the psyche of little people, as is the case with hundreds of millions of people in India and South Africa, and consider one's own uncomplaining obedience to those around as the norm, as draft animals obey man. The beggarly existence of the owners of such worldview systems is guaranteed for centuries. But people can also have such raviousness when life in harmony with nature, in harmony with people around, is taken as the norm. When it is equally unacceptable for people to acquire the social status of either a slave or a slave owner. On the basis of the prevailing raviousness and this or that worldview, people themselves form the conception of their life, or live according to recipes that are imposed on them from the outside, most often bypassing their consciousness. It is this conception that conditions culture, conditions legislation culture, i.e., the laws by which, among other things, the economy is organized. What is encouraged in one culture may be seen as the worst of crimes in another culture. So, for example, usury, the receiving of income without creating anything socially useful, is considered the norm of biblical culture and is prohibited as the gravest of crimes and sin in the Quranic culture. A society that has not comprehended the ravious conditionality of the state of affairs in the economy has no future. This happened with our country when we did not detect the insane, up to 210% per annum, usury imposed on us by the biblical West as a deadly, cancerous effect on the economic mechanism.
Could you describe your team's view on the basic requirements for the objectives of Russia's development?
Russia's development strategy, vector of objectives of governance towards her, i.e., the list of what our society would like to receive as a result of governorial activities, should be adequate to the raviousness, worldview, and culture of our people. Otherwise, the plan stemming from a vicious strategy will stumble at every step over the raviously conditioned opposition to them. We proceed from the fact that in the multinational Russian civilization, the objective of the development of the personality itself, the mastery of the genetically determined potential of development of man, has always been an objective as a system-forming one, and this objective is not achieved at the expense of the development of other people. Herewith, we understand that any society that stably exists in the biosphere of the planet has its own, historically suffered-out ideals, expressed if not in official ideology, then in folk art, folklore, anecdotes, folk tales, epics, and so on. If the vector of objectives of development is oriented towards the mode absence of ideology, then a methodologically literate society understands that this is a screen behind which the objective of erasing historically suffered out ideals is proclaimed by default. Therewith, in real life, in fact, any human aspirations will be suppressed, except for animal instincts of a sexual digestive nature and other sensual pleasures and consumerism, leading to the degradation of the individual and society as a whole. The result of the de-idealization of society is the rampant multiplication by reasoning of cattle and consumer cruelty, which is more terrible than predation in nature. As 10 years of perestroika have shown, one can no longer hide from the dangers of such a life in Russia, either in the barracks for workers, or behind the fence of an elite villa, or behind the armor of a limousine. And therefore, state guardianship and legislation on the development and protection of the chosen ideology should be included in the number of priorities in the vector of objectives for the development of statehood. The acceptable for the Russian civilization ideology is based on the formation of equal opportunities for all-round development and ensuring the safety of the people. If we talk about the economic essence of objectives of development, then the conceptual choice here is actually possible only between two variants. Either Russia is our home, or Russia is a pan-European oil, gas, electro, timber industry, and we are all slaves of the oligarchic clans of the West. Until such time as we publicly agree on the subjective choice of one of these two variants for strategic objectives, the country will remain in the mode of conceptually non-determined state governance. With that, the efforts of representatives of different conceptions, having a mutually exclusive purpose consonance and direction of actions, will give a return to the country itself that will be close to zero. Conceptually non-determined governance generates de-idealization, luxuriating, and the sale of the country's labor, raw materials, and intellectual resources to transnational corporations for a pittance and commission. Only the clearly expressed conception of social safety can create conditions where the domestic intellect will work inside the country in governance and in science, and raw materials and energy potential based on high and safe technologies will be processed into the well-being of its own people, but not into the well-being of the G7 oligarchs and the fed by them oligarchic crooks of the former USSR.
If the main thing, as you think, is to implement conceptually determined governance, then could you name some litmus tests that would help distinguish leaders who are committed to the first conception from those who do not see Russia as their home and long ago sent their children and grandchildren to study or even live abroad?
Such basic control questions, of course, exist. Let's try to shape some of them. To implement one's own development strategy, one needs to select a team of such governors who uniformly answer the following control questions. 1. Should the sphere of governance of all sectors of the life of society be staffed on a narrow clan basis, or should the entire society become a cadre base? How does the expansion of the cadre base affect the quality of governance? 2. Should the state provide real, equal opportunities for obtaining any higher education by all children, regardless of the income and type of activity of their parents? 3. What, to society, is of the highest significance, the sphere of production of goods and services, or bank and exchange speculations and services of jurisprudence? 4. Is there a threshold value of loan interest at which the inevitable degradation of the sphere of social production with its fixed profitability begins? 5. Should loan interest be free, or should it be limited by law? 6. Should the nutrition of the population be dominated by fresh products from the region of residence, or imported products, in which there are up to 10 grams of food dyes, stabilizers, and other preservatives per 100 grams of food? In accordance with the answers to these questions, it will be clear what and how the candidates for power in society will develop, whether their efforts will be coordinated or multidirectional.
If objectives of development are the starting point of all governorial processes, then who should form such objectives, structures of power or society itself? How should their achievement be organized?
Of course, the whole society. This is precisely where the origins of democracy in any regime lie. Democracy consists not only in the choice among 5 candidates, who inevitably go through some kind of behind-the-scenes selection, behind the scenes in the sense of absence of publicity. Selection of only one, the one who will realize the previously established, obviously alien to the voters, objectives, and precisely in the involvement of everyone in the formation of the vector of objectives of governance. The selection of cadres at the elections should go through the identification of the nature of their answers to the control questions and the correspondence of the candidates' capabilities to the level of the assigned tasks. At the same time, in society itself, a sufficiently large stratum of people should be brought up, people who can explain the significance of these questions and the answers to them, for the ensuring of the prosperity of the majority who are ready to live by labor, in contrast to the minority of so-called great schemers who strive to live at the expense of others. To bring up such people, at least one radio and television channel should appear in the country, oriented towards those who are fed up with the bestiality being implanted and who still retain the desire to become human and raise children not with an animal type of psyche structure, but with the type of psyche of a truly reasoning human. It is absurd, as Strugatsky did in the December expert issue Northwest, to justify television pornography, atrocities, and all that darkness by the interest of the viewers themselves. Tastes and interests are shaped by culture. At the beginning, for 10 years, the viewers were brainwashed for the cattle-animal outlook on life, and we are saying this to them as well. If society has democratically formed the vector of objectives of governance, then only from this moment will there appear clearly expressed functions for those who are at the helm of state power. This is how the President of the Russian Federation, Vladimir Putin, understands this problem, positioning himself as a governor who is hired by voters to perform on a contract basis. The peculiarity of the current moment is the fact that in the sphere of social governance towards the society's initiative, the process of epiphany of humanity has been prepared, with the dehermetization of views on the true schemes of governance. The point is that obtaining the wanted final results in the social sphere is possible only on the basis of the autocratic implementation of the entire function of governance in relation to society, which leads to the concept of conceptual power. Conceptual power is the highest intrasocial, encompassing level of social governance. Legislative, executive, and judicial branches are equally subordinate to it. Conceptual power is, by its character, twofold. Firstly, it is the power of people who are able to discern problems and set tasks in such a way that the rest of society, willingly or unwillingly, will be governed by these ideas. And secondly, it is the power over society of the ideas themselves, expressed by the carriers of the conceptual power. Historically, it is true that if one or another society did not come to its own understanding of the algorithms of the work of conceptual power, then nevertheless it is governed according to the entire function and is enclosed on an external, interregional center of conceptually powerful governance. The governance towards such conceptually powerless societies is exercised by external conceptual power with the help of the 6 priorities of generalized means of governance, which we have already discussed in detail.
Viktor Alexeyevich, could you outline the most important requirements for economics for an effective economic mechanism?
Economics as a science generates 2 fundamentally different classes of theories. Some teach how an individual entrepreneur or structure can feather his nest without regard to social well-being, how to legally take money out of the pocket of the laborer. Others put in the first place the formation of a worthy life for the majority, the strengthening and development of the whole society. In the latter case, economics distinguishes, from among the entire spectrum of the needs of society, degradationally parasitic and demographically conditioned components. The first of them is not prognosable in principle, since it is conditioned by the viciousness of individuals, perversions, and their absence of the sense of measure. The satisfaction of such needs leads to the oppression of the genetics of the individual and his kind, as well as the people around him and of the biosphere as a habitat. As for the biospherically acceptable, demographically conditioned needs, they are rigidly conditioned by the number and age and sex structure of residents. the need to maintain the functional operability of society's infrastructures that ensures the assembly of a plurality of individuals into a social organism, and therefore, demographically conditioned needs are predictable in a probabilistic and statistical sense. This is the basis for the regulation of the system of the production and distribution of goods and services in society for their total and guaranteed satisfaction. I wish politicians, economists, and jurists had the desire to take this path and go along it. The orientation towards guaranteed satisfaction of demographically conditioned needs enables us to form a vector of objectives for economic development and move on to the formation of balances of production and development of each administrative territorial unit, federal district, region, district, both in physical and in financial accounting of products. Mathematically, such a balance is described by a system of linear equations reflecting the process of product exchange of each sector or region with all other sectors or regions and with the population. In short, the essence of the proposed algorithm can be expressed by the following formula. From integrated, technologically enclosed agro-industrial complexes to the balanced development of regions in the name of creating a single national economic complex based on the principle of a self-sufficient state superconcern, uniting production based on various forms of ownership. And such a state should have principles of arrangement and governance adequate to the economic essence. And no matter what sophisticated methods are used to distort the principles of state arrangement, today everyone should understand that Russia has reached that Mravius psychological development in which its population will no longer work as mules for oligarchs and so-called great schemers.